At 67, Eleanor Pike spent $410 on 96 acres of drowned bottomland at a county tax auction. Her children did not think she had bought land. They thought she had bought evidence. Evidence that grief had finally loosened something in her mind. The parcel sat 7 miles outside Bramble, Missouri, behind a leaning cattle gate and a ditch full of brown water. Locals called it Henderson Flats, though nothing about it felt flat once you stepped into it. The ground swallowed boots. Mosquitoes rose in black clouds. Cattails stood taller than a grown man. For 28 years, every auctioneer in Benton County had read the same description with the same tired smile. 96 acres. Agricultural classification. No road improvements. Seasonal water hazard. That was the polite version. The honest version was that everybody knew it as the drowned place. Eleanor's oldest son, Grant, called first. He sold commercial property in St. Louis and spoke in the careful voice of a man trying not to frighten an elderly parent. "Mom," he said, "Melissa told me you signed for some land today." Eleanor stood in her kitchen with the deed beside the sink and a mason jar of tea sweating on the counter. "I did." "How much land?" 96 acres. There was a pause. "Of Henderson Flats?" "That is what the county calls it." Grant exhaled through his nose. She could hear traffic behind him, the clean little hiss of an office headset. The distant world where land meant zoning, frontage, comparables, and projected return. "Mom, that place is not land. It is standing water with a parcel number." Eleanor looked through the window at the clothesline Walter had put up 40 years earlier. 2 years after his funeral, she still sometimes expected to see his work shirt moving there in the wind. "It has more under it than people think," she said. That was the sentence that convinced Grant she needed help. By sunset, Melissa had called from Springfield. Melissa was a nurse practitioner, so she did not begin with money. She began with symptoms. "Are you sleeping?" "Yes." "Are you eating?" "Yes." "Are you still going to church?" "When the preacher keeps the sermon under an hour." "Mom, I am all right, honey." "You bought a swamp." "I bought a mistake," Eleanor said. "There is a difference." Owen, the youngest, called after dinner. He taught history at a community college and always tried to be gentle before he became blunt. "Everybody is worried," he said. "Grant thinks somebody took advantage of you. Melissa thinks you might be isolated. I just think maybe you are doing too much alone." "I have been alone before," Eleanor said. "That is not an answer." "No," she said, "it is experience." The three of them believed they were looking at the whole picture. A widow, a tax auction, a useless marsh, a small town whispering that she had finally crossed some invisible line. But they were only looking at the surface, and surface was the one thing Eleanor Pike had never trusted. She had grown up less than 4 miles from Henderson Flats, on a farm where her father, Amos, could walk a field once and tell you where the water was hiding. Amos Pike did not speak much. He taught by making Eleanor stand still. He would point at a patch of grass in August that was greener than everything around it and say, "Something is feeding that." He would tap a low ridge with his boot and say, "Water will not climb if you give it a door." He would lift a handful of soil to her face and make her smell the difference between dirt that was sleeping and dirt that was starving. Other children in Bramble learned piano, sewing, baseball, fractions. Eleanor learned that land does not lie. It waits. By 19, she had left for college on a scholarship that embarrassed her father because he was too proud to show how proud he was. She studied soil science first, then watershed management. Later, she came home and spent 34 years in a cramped office for the Regional Conservation District, sorting drainage maps, reviewing pond permits, reading old survey notes, and answering phone calls from men who wanted her to approve quick fixes she knew would fail. She was not famous. She was not rich. She was the woman in the basement office who knew which creek had been moved in 1938, which culvert had been poured too small in 1956, which farmer had buried a clay tile line without telling the county, and which low pasture used to stay dry before somebody straightened the wrong bend. She knew Henderson Flats because the county had forgotten it. In 1974, the state widened Route 19. The engineers cut a cleaner roadside ditch and buried a new concrete culvert under the pavement. The project saved a few minutes for trucks moving between towns, but it also did one quiet thing the plans barely mentioned. It blocked the old outlet. Before the road work, Henderson Flats had not been a swamp. It had been bottomland pasture, heavy and black, damp in March, rich by May. The kind of soil that made old farmers talk softly. A spring seeped from a gravel seam near the middle of the parcel, then trickled east through a run of clay tiles and limestone rubble into a narrow creek branch on the far side of the road. The new culvert missed that run by less than 12 feet. Less than the length of Eleanor's kitchen. The spring kept rising, the water kept searching, but the door it had used for decades was sealed under fill, asphalt, and a mistake no one wanted to admit had happened. Within 6 years, the pasture turned sour. Cows bogged to their knees. Fence posts rotted. The Henderson family tried to trench it, then tried to lease it for duck blinds, then stopped paying taxes. By the time Eleanor retired, the land had become a joke told every January in the auction room. Worthless, unusable, dead. Except Eleanor had seen the 1952 soil survey. She had read the 1974 change order. She had held the old drainage sketch in her hands, the one with a pencil note in the margin that said, "Spring outlet uncertain." Uncertain was a word men used when they had not looked long enough. At the auction, the room smelled of damp wool and burnt coffee. Farmers sat with folded arms. A feed store owner nodded through the early parcels. A young man in polished shoes flipped through the list, searching for anything with frontage. Then the auctioneer reached Henderson Flats. He did not even try to sound hopeful. "Parcel 12C," 96 acres south of Bramble. Opening bid $400 for taxes and fees. Someone chuckled. $400 for a mosquito hatchery, a man muttered. The auctioneer lifted the gavel. He had done this routine for years. Ask once, ask twice, mark it unsold. Then Eleanor raised her hand. 410. The room turned toward her as one body. The auctioneer squinted. Mrs. Pike? Yes. For Henderson Flats? Yes. Nobody bid against her. Nobody wanted to be cruel enough to make her pay more. The gavel came down. $410, 96 acres, and a room full of people deciding, in the same breath, that Eleanor Pike had lost her good sense. She let them decide it. The first month she did not dig. That bothered people most. If she had rushed out with a rented excavator, they could have laughed at the spectacle. Instead, she walked the land every morning with rubber boots, a walking stick, and a canvas satchel full of maps sealed in plastic sleeves. She marked nothing with flags at first. She only stood. She watched where duckweed gathered. She pushed the stick into mud and listened for gravel. She knelt beside trickles so faint they looked like wind moving on water. She came home with mud up to her knees and a calmness that made her children more afraid. After 3 weeks, she hired a young man named Caleb Voss. Caleb was 22, broad-shouldered, broke, and angry, in the unfocused way of young men who had never been trusted with anything difficult. He had been fired from the tire shop, quit the lumber yard, and was mowing the cemetery when Eleanor found him. "I need steady help," she said. "With what?" "I am opening a field." He looked past her toward the road. "You mean Henderson Flats?" "Yes." "That is not a field." "It was." Caleb laughed once, then realized she was serious. She offered him $12 an hour, lunch, and more respect than most people had given him that year. He showed up the next morning. At first, he thought she was paying him to walk in circles. Eleanor would stop in ankle-deep water and ask, "Feel that?" "Feel what?" "Your left foot is sinking faster than your right." "That is because this whole place is soup." "No, because the old run is under your left foot." Caleb rolled his eyes where she could see it. She ignored him. He kept showing up because she paid cash every Friday, because she brought biscuits wrapped in foil, and because, though he would never have admitted it, he liked that she explained things as if he were capable of understanding them. By June, they had rented a battered backhoe from a dairy farmer who warned them that if they drowned it, they bought it. Eleanor did not let Caleb dig big trenches. She made him peel the land open in short, careful cuts. 2 feet here, 6 feet there. Stop when the mud changes color. Stop when the bucket sounds different. Stop when the water clears. The whole county watched from a distance. At the diner, men said she was hunting treasure. At the grocery store, women lowered their voices when she passed. Grant drove down one Saturday in a pressed shirt and town shoes. He stood at the edge of the cattails, swatting insects, while Eleanor held a shovel like a cane. "You have already spent more than the land is worth," he said. "No," she said. "I have spent more than people think it is worth." "That is not better." "It might be the only difference that matters." He asked to see her receipts. She handed him a mud-stained notebook instead. He opened it and found water levels, soil notes, culvert measurements, dates of rain, and hand-drawn cross-sections of the field. Grant did not know what to do with a ledger that did not speak his language. By late August, the work looked like failure. A storm came hard out of the west and filled every trench they had opened. The backhoe sank to its axle. Caleb spent half a day digging it free, and the other half saying words Eleanor pretended not to hear. When the engine finally coughed and died, he climbed down covered in mud from neck to boots. "There is nothing under here," he said. "There is. There is water. That is all." He did not come back the next day. That evening, Eleanor sat alone on the porch while thunder moved away over the hills. For the first time, the doubt came in clear. Not loud, clear. Maybe the maps were wrong. Maybe the outlet had been crushed beyond finding. Maybe she had spent her life learning to read a language the world no longer needed. Maybe her children were not insulting her by worrying. Maybe they were right. She went inside and opened a tin box from the top shelf of the hall closet. Inside were her father's field notes tied with baling twine. Rainfall, frost dates, calving trouble, corn stand counts. He had kept records not because anyone paid him, but because attention was a form of respect. On the last page, in his square handwriting, he had written one line. "Water does not need force. It needs permission." Eleanor sat with that sentence for a long time. Then she called Caleb. His mother answered first. Then Caleb came on, guarded and ashamed. "I cannot pay you to believe me," Eleanor said, "but I can pay you to come back tomorrow." He was silent. "And if I am wrong," she added, "you can be the first person in Bramble to say so to my face." He showed up at 7. At 11:40, the bucket struck something that did not sound like stone. It was hollow. Caleb froze. Eleanor climbed down before he could tell her not to. Together they scraped mud away with their hands until a curved red edge appeared beneath the black muck. A clay tile, 7 inches across, collapsed, packed with roots, but real. Caleb stared at it as if the land had spoken in a voice he could hear. Eleanor only put one hand on the tile and closed her eyes. After that, the work changed. The field was no longer an enemy. It was a locked room with one door found. They traced a clay line east, replacing broken sections with perforated pipe wrapped in gravel and fabric. They uncovered a run of limestone rubble so old the stones were slick as bone. They found the spring seam under 3 feet of peat, where cold, clear water rose through gravel with a steady patience of breath. Caleb stopped asking if she was sure. He started asking what the ground was saying. By October, they had located the buried outlet near Route 19. It lay 12 feet north of where the 1974 plan said it should have been, hidden under a lip of fill and choked with silt. Opening it required permits, 2 meetings with the county road office, and one red-faced supervisor who did not like being handed his own archived map by a retired widow. Eleanor was polite. She was also immovable. The county agreed to let her tie into the old branch with a new culvert sleeve as long as she paid for the work and signed a liability release. Grant called it reckless. Melissa called it obsessive. Owen called it impossible. Eleanor called it Tuesday. The day they made the final cut, nothing dramatic happened. No wall of water thundered out, no cheering crowd gathered. The field did not transform under a beam of sunlight. There was only a low pull beneath the surface. A thin brown current started moving east, then another. Then the water in one trench lowered enough to reveal a ridge of black earth that had not seen air in nearly 30 years. Caleb removed his cap. Neither of them spoke. All winter, the field drained under ice. In March, Henderson Flats looked worse than ever to people passing on the road. It was a wide scar of mud, stubble, and exposed roots. The cattails lay flattened. The old waterline stained the brush. No one looking from a truck window would have called it beautiful. But Eleanor walked out at dawn, pressed a spade into the ground, and turned over a slice of soil so dark it looked blue. It smelled sweet, not rotten, not trapped, alive. She sent no picture to her children. Some things lose power when you try to prove them too early. The next 2 years were not glamorous. They were cover crop years. Clover, rye, buckwheat, daikon radish to break the compaction, native grasses along the low swales, willow stakes where the banks needed holding, soil tests, lime, patience, more patience, and Caleb learning to read root depth like other people read text messages. The town's laughter thinned, then stopped. A farmer asked Eleanor who had done her drainage plan. She said, "My father started it. Caleb and I finished listening." The third spring, Henderson Flats was not Henderson Flats anymore. It was 96 acres of firm black bottomland with water moving where it belonged, not erased, guided. The spring still ran. The ditch still carried overflow. The wetland edge still held frogs and red-winged blackbirds. But the center of the parcel could now grow. Eleanor did not plant it fence to fence in soybeans. That made Grant more confused than the swamp had. Instead, she filed papers for a non-profit teaching farm. Half the land became rented garden plots for families in town. 10 acres became an orchard of pawpaw, apple, and pear trees. A long strip by the road became pollinator meadow. The school district got a 1/4 acre for children who had never pulled a carrot from anything but a grocery bag. Caleb built a greenhouse from salvaged windows and learned enough horticulture to correct people with confidence. By then, the whispers had changed. Not poor Eleanor. Not somebody should stop her. Now it was, have you seen what she did out there? Her children heard those whispers from relatives and misunderstood them completely. They decided to come together. Grant from St. Louis, Melissa from Springfield, Owen from Tulsa. They met first at the diner because intervention requires planning and pie. Grant brought spreadsheets. Melissa brought a list of questions. Owen brought the tired hope that everybody might avoid saying something unforgivable. They expected mud. They expected debt. They expected their mother, thinner and more stubborn, standing in the middle of a ruined obsession. Then they turned onto the road and saw cars parked along a clean gravel lane. They saw a sign at the gate, Pike Spring Community Farm. Beyond it, rows of young fruit trees moved in the wind. Families bent over garden beds. Children carried watering cans. A greenhouse flashed in the sun. At the far edge, a clear, narrow channel ran through grass, not stagnant, not hidden, but working. The three of them stepped out of the car and stood in silence. Their shoes did not sink. That was what broke Grant first. He looked down at the firm ground beneath him as if it had personally betrayed his certainty. Eleanor was near the greenhouse with Caleb, who was no longer the angry boy from the cemetery lawn. He had a beard now, cleaner boots, and the posture of a man who knew what he was responsible for. Melissa saw her mother's hands before anything else, brown from sun, nails broken, strong, not lost, not frail, not confused. Eleanor looked up and smiled as if she had been expecting them for years. Grant walked toward her slowly. "Mom," he said, and the word came out small. "How did you do this?" Eleanor wiped soil from her palm onto her work pants. "I did not do much to the land," she said. "I stopped asking it to be a swamp." He looked past her at the orchards, the gardens, the clear water moving through the channel. But it was worthless. "No," Eleanor said. "It was misread." That was the moment her children finally understood the cruelty hidden inside their concern. They had loved her, but they had measured her by tools that could not measure her. Grant had looked for market value. Melissa had looked for symptoms. Owen had looked for a story that made sense from the outside. Eleanor had been reading the older text under all of it. The slope, the spring, the buried tile, the place where water had been denied its door. 9 years later, Pike Spring Community Farm was the center of Bramble. Caleb was the farm manager, certified in horticulture, married to a woman who ran the weekend produce stand, and father to a little girl who followed Eleanor through the orchard, asking why worms were good. The land that had cost $410 had been appraised at $3.4 million. Developers came twice with offers that made Grant go quiet. One wanted a lakefront subdivision, though the lakefront was water Eleanor had spent years teaching the land not to hold. Another wanted a private retreat with a gate, cabins, and imported stone. Eleanor listened politely. Then she placed the entire parcel into a permanent community trust. Not because money meant nothing, but because some things become worthless the moment they are owned by the wrong dream. On fall mornings, Eleanor walked the old drainage line with her grandchildren. She made them kneel, crumble soil in their hands, smell it, notice what most people hurried past. She showed them the spring box Caleb had built around the gravel seam. She showed them the culvert sleeve under Route 19. She showed them the low swale where water moved quietly east, taking the easiest door because someone had finally given it permission. To most of the county, the miracle was that a widow bought a swamp for $410 and turned it into land worth millions. But that was never the miracle. The miracle was that the field had been telling the truth the whole time. And Eleanor Pike had been the only one quiet enough to hear it.